right, everyone. Here we are in Schenectady. Welcome to our podcast for today. How are you guys doing today?
Good. Podcast, huh? Pretty good.
Well, hi, folks out there in TV land. My name is Mike Diana, and I'm the Director of Education here at the Schenectady County Historical Society. I'm joined by my colleague,
Mary Zawacki, Executive Director.
Executive Director. That sounds pretty executive. Wow, cool. And who's our guest today? It's a familiar face.
It is Mareitta Carr. She is our librarian and archivist.
Well, Marietta, I feel like I haven't seen you in weeks. It feels like we've been so busy at the Historical Society. What have you been up to?
Well, at the library, we've been working with researchers. We've been working with volunteers on a lot of our projects. Just overall programs, candlelight tours, activities around the Historical Society buildings. So me personally, I've been working with my volunteers on our map collection and our History Forge and our African American Historical Records project, and working on getting ready for our winter research season.
Okay.
It's definitely been a very busy fall.
Yeah.
And this is kind of an interesting way that we're all sitting down together because usually these here in Schenectady are kind of done, well, out and about.
Yeah, we just take our little smartphones out and whatever happens.
Right,
but
exactly.
Gosh, here we are in this beautiful studio. If you look all around, man, this is some fancy tech. And of course, this is all made possible by Open Stage Media, who are helping us out with this studio here today. We're really excited to be working with them.
And it's kind of interesting how, I mean, if you couldn't guess from Marietta's little teaser there, we're going to be talking about maps today. So we're kind of exploring Schenectady, but in a totally different way than our usual videos. Like we can go into a different level of detail.
Oh, yeah. And actually, hold on. Maybe we should back up. Maybe
we should
introduce ourselves, just in case, like our organization, right? Because maybe there's some first-time viewers who aren't familiar with the Schenectady County Historical Society.
I can't believe anyone wouldn't know about
I know.
us.
We're very famous and recognized in grocery stores. But what is our organization, folks? If you're not familiar, we've been here in Schenectady since 1905. We're an old organization. And our mission, the mission of the Schenectady County Historical Society, is that we share stories, inspire dialogue, and encourage understanding of the history, people, and culture of our region. And we try to do this in as many fun ways as we can, like ghost tours, like gosh, all the fun family programs that we do. I mean, the list goes on.
A lot of school programs that you've been doing.
School programs. Oh yeah, just finished up with one. I mean, those kids were pretty cool, but it can get pretty overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, but also I would say the history of Schenectady, not to use the term overwhelming, but there are so many stories to tell that it definitely keeps us busy.
Absolutely. I mean, it feels like there's always more things that I wish I could do research on. There's always more stories that I wish I knew. And even beyond that, just a perpetual curiosity about what has been here in our local community.
Right, exactly. And that kind of brings us to today. What's hiding away in our archive?
Yeah.
We have a great museum and library down in the Stockade district of Schenectady. That's where Marietta tends to hang out.
Absolutely.
That's her domain. And in the basement is an incredible trove of everything, all kinds of things, including,
Well, Marietta, why don't you introduce for someone who has never heard of the Grems Doolittle Library before, what's it all about?
Yeah, so I love it. I'm always excited to go into the library and talk about the collections, the archives, and the different materials that we have. We, like you said, we're down in the Stockade neighborhood at 32 Washington Avenue. The front part of the building is the museum. The back part of the building is the Grems Doolittle Library. And it was added in 1992 specifically to house the documentary, photographic, and paper collections of our history, of our region. So we have documents dating back to 1670 all the way up to today. We're collecting today. We collect things regularly from individuals and organizations around the county, documenting what's been going on for the last over 300 years.
And Marietta, I'm sure this is all contained neatly in one single file cabinet, right?
And every page is digitized, right?
Oh my goodness. Oh no. No. It's literally not possible to digitize all of the things that we have in the collection. It would take us forever.
So some things are digitized and some things people have to come in and look at in person, which
Absolutely.
is, I think that's kind of a good balance.
Because there's thousands of these things. Tens of thousands?
Tens of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands?
Could be if you're counting each individual page.
I never counted each individual page. Right?
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's a
I
lot.
was going to do that on Thursday. Yeah.
You might need several Thursdays.
Okay.
You might need some extra help with that. Yes.
Yeah.
I like to say, just to give a general overview of what we have, basically every kind of format. We have documents, photos, records, like vinyl records, audio cassettes, VHS, DVDs, drawings, paintings, just everything, every kind of format that you can think of, putting something in writing or recording art or recording text or recording thoughts. We have a format to match that.
Right.
And in terms of what has been digitized versus what's still physical only, about 15% of our collection has been digitized overall.
Wow.
But we should pop in and say that that's not to say that the materials aren't cataloged, there aren't finding aids. If you have a question, even if that document, the document that might answer that question hasn't been digitized, Marietta has ways to figure out all the documents that are in there, what's inside of them, and can point you in the right direction. So we have a pretty good handle on what's in there.
Right.
It's just not every page has been scanned
And
and
that's
uploaded.
Decades and decades of volunteer work, librarian work, researchers, historians. Everyone has contributed to our understanding of this collection. So we have an online catalog. We have on our website, we have finding aids and collection descriptions. We also have a fair number of indexes where volunteers have gone through, like our obituary collection, and indexed the names in those obituaries. Our deed collection, we have a large list of all the deeds in our what we call the historic manuscripts collection, and the names on all of those deeds have been listed out into this massive searchable document that we can point researchers to when they're trying to figure out, like, who used to live in their house, those sorts of things.
I like that you're kind of the connector between people who have questions and these documents, and you know how to make everything match up so that people, right? Because if you had never done historical research before, you might be totally overwhelmed. Like, where do I even start? But you go and you talk to Marietta, and I feel like she always knows.
Well, yeah, wait, are you telling me that any Joe Schmo can show up and do research? You don't just have to be a PhD in history or anything like that?
No, literally anyone can come to the library. We are only open by appointment, so you do have to call me in advance or send me an email, and we'll set up an appointment for you. And I do point you to our online resources to help you figure out what's in our collections that was relevant to your research. But we have kids as young as 4th graders come and do research for their school newspaper or for their family history projects, and all the way up to, like you said, college students, PhD students, retired people who have suddenly taken an interest in genealogy, people trying to figure out their house histories, people trying to write historical fiction. We have people come and use our collection to get a better grounding of the time period, of the people and places, and use primary sources and original sources to create a fictional landscape or a fictional character. We've had some really interesting research questions with, for example, scientific research. Someone studying whether eels were ever in the Mohawk River, that sort of question.
I remember that controversy. And
Wait, what? Why was it a controversy?
well, it's a very high stakes question as to whether the eel place or the Alplouts specifically referred to eels or to lampreys, I guess was the other contender. And
Yep.
that does have, I guess, ecological ramifications, right? Because I don't think there's any eels in the river right now, right?
Right, and that's part of the problem. The big question of, okay, so they can do scientific research to track what species are in the river today, and they can go back a few decades in terms of the research that has been done over time. But then, you have these primary sources. These are these sources from a couple hundred years ago that insist that eels were there. But do they really mean eels, or do they mean something else? And if that's the case, how do you connect that to what humans have done over to the river over time?
And that's a great segue into our map collection.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like maps touch on all of these issues. Place names changing over time. Landscape, of course, changing over time. The river has changed a lot. The tributaries going into the Mohawk River have changed. I mean,
Natural and artificial changes,
totally.
you know?
So let's start at like the very, very beginning. What is the oldest map in the archival collection? Tell us about that. That's what I want to know.
So the oldest map that we have at the Historical Society is the 1698 Romer map, and we have actually a version of it, a duplication of it, hanging up in the museum at the moment as well. And we have a copy of it. There's a couple other copies that are in other repositories, but that is our oldest map that we can reference.
Any quirky details on it? I mean, 1698 is a long time ago, and I have seen the map. It is Schenectady is like basically 2 dots.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of some quirky details. I don't want to intrude here. My quirky detail is that north isn't pointing up. North is pointing like kind of weird off to the, I think it's off to the left side there.
Yes, it is oriented so that as you're coming, it's essentially oriented as you're coming into Schenectady on the Mohawk River.
Right. See, I love that, right? Because that tells us so much about the time period.
Like their literal perspective was just completely shifted from our modern Google Maps perspective.
You enter the city pretty much through 890 today.
Oh yeah, and back then they had a more riverine perspective, which I think is quite nice. Huh. So that's an old map, and I know that in my work I reference that map a lot. I do have people kind of tilt their head to the side so they can understand it a little bit better. But I mean, so that's our starting point. But kind of what develops from there? Where do the maps go from there?
Right. So I brought some examples to talk through some of the maps in our collection. Jumping up from 1690, the next map that I often reference is the 1750 map.
Oh.
And it essentially what you were saying, Mary, about it being very bare bones. You can see the square of the Stockade neighborhood and then some roads leading off. Literally, the map says road to the woods. Wow. And a couple of buildings dotting along those roads showing where the settlement part of the city has, or what now is the city, has come up. But it also shows the islands. And for example, one of the big islands, the Van Slyke Island, doesn't exist anymore because it was filled in at the Binnykill that separated that island and created the water circle around it. The Binnykill was filled in. And so I get a lot of questions in the library from people who read a reference somewhere in doing their genealogy or in doing a history of Schenectady to Van Slyke Island, and it's something that they don't know where it is, and B, can't even visualize because we have literally completely built over it.
It is hard to visualize sometimes what the Binnykill really how it looked, especially because the harbor and the waterfront was down there, and it was such a place of activity that just totally doesn't exist anymore. I have a hard time visualizing it, but these maps, they definitely help.
Yeah, I'm always talking to folks about this kind of stuff, and I can describe it, sure, but gosh, I wish I could just carry all these maps in my pocket, just fold them up nice and just stick them in the back pocket there to have them when I need to illustrate this changing landscape. And the landscape certainly has changed in so many ways.
Can we talk real quick about the stockade? Because, I mean, we're very familiar with that term. We work there, we're there all the time. I get a lot of people asking, what does that even mean? Like, what is a stockade? Were there walls? What happened to the walls, etc.? What do the maps reveal about that? Like, tell us.
So it's a great question, especially because it is kind of an unusual term. We don't use it commonly anymore, and it's especially when you're describing a neighborhood that doesn't look like it just looks like a regular neighborhood. What makes this stockade area special? And that's another good point about the maps, is that we don't actually have a visual of what the stockade and what Schenectady looked like in 1698 or 1750, except for the maps. The artists drawing and painting at the time, there may have been people drawing scenic views of Schenectady, the beautiful Mohawk, but whether those have survived, we don't have them.
Or that they're even labeled as such, right? It could be in someone's journal and it doesn't even say that, etc. There's so much of this stuff so it is really quite a treasure that we have these two early maps.
Right. So the stockade, it did have walls. It was a fence, and stockade fencing nowadays, when you think of those slats put together I have a stockade fence in my backyard, for example, but that's not quite what we're talking about here. This was it was a fenced in area, but it isn't like it was a fortified, really fort that we think about when we think of like Fort Ticonderoga or
Right.
Fort Johnson or something like that.
Right. Nothing, I guess, too imposing if you were a determined foe, a determined threat, right?
Right. Well, and also for people living there, the other thing about when we think about a stockade or a fort, we often think about it as people living inside the walls. But the stockade neighborhood was literally 4 blocks
Right.
originally, and it eventually went, over time expanded. But people were always living outside of those 4 blocks, which is again on the 1750 map. You can see
Right.
the settlement, how people have always been living along those roads and further down
In
from
the suburbs, right?
Yes.
Like right where right where we are right now would be kind of the suburb, or maybe even the exurb at that point. We'd be way out in the
the hinterland in
yeah.
the woods. According to
Right.
that map, it's the
In the
wood. We're in the
woods.
woods right now.
So take us chronologically from the stockade with a few folks living outside of it. What's next in the evolution of Schenectady maps? What's like the next big thing that we see?
So we jump ahead. So there's a lot that goes on between 1750 and 1800, especially with the American Revolution and Schenectady becoming a city. But I'd like to point to this 1850 map that literally 100 years later, and you can see how much development has happened in every direction.
That's probably my favorite map. And that one is also hanging in the museum, and I look at it almost every day.
Right.
It's so great.
The one I brought today is a duplication of it, and the one that we have hanging up in the museum is an original and it has a wear and tear to it, which also is kind of interesting to see how the maps have aged over the years. But this, again, we're going literally in every direction. And I also want to point out a lot of the maps that we're talking about today, and that, again, as we're going through like the chronology of our maps, have to deal with the city of Schenectady, but we do have maps from around the county. Literally every area of the county, we have maps
That's a great
related
point.
to them. It's just so I find that these ones are particularly striking because you can see literally 100 years later just how much more has grown in terms of the Erie Canal is now on this map.
Yeah, if we
Right.
don't mention the Erie Canal at least once per episode, we will lose our accreditation. So we do
Yes.
have to get that in there.
Are there any early industries on that map?
Yes, so the railroad is on that map, and so is the start of the railroad industry in this area. So there's a couple of points on there where you can see like factory building.
And that's a huge difference from just 50 years before,
Yes.
or 100 years.
Well,
I should
100,
say,
100
yeah.
years from the previous map,
Yeah.
but even thinking about 50 years before. So Schenectady, becomes a city in 1795. The Revolutionary War has just finished, the whole concept of like a new country. But generally what people think about in those time periods is a more agrarian society, farmers on horseback and carriages going through the streets. But we do have a railroad by 1830.
Right.
In the mid 1830s, that railroad is here and is changing the landscape of Schenectady.
I see a bridge across the river now. That's new, right? A couple bridges in this map.
That's new. So the first bridge to cross the Mohawk River was in 1808, and we have a lot of materials related to. It's called the Burr Bridge, and the bridge lasted quite a long time. It went through again some renovations and reconstructions, but it lasted until the late 1870s before it was torn down and replaced by an iron bridge.
Yeah, we have a lot of paintings of the Burr Bridge in our collection, and I always think about how stinky it must have been.
Yes.
And dark and just really gross. Kind of glad I missed it, honestly. Don't think I would have been into that.
I don't know. Yeah, I'd go over it once and then just like never again.
Well, you'd have to because you'd have to get home. to
Well, I
Scotia.
do. I do live on the
So
other
you
side
wouldn't
of the
have a
river.
choice.
No, I guess I just have to get a different job or something because it was a tolled bridge. I don't think I could afford the tolls.
Well,
every
maybe
day.
we would help out with that.
Okay, cool.
Taking into account these 3 maps, or perhaps one that we haven't discussed yet, and the smells perhaps of the different eras, is there a map that you would want to step into for an afternoon and explore one map more than the other? Which really are you like, I just wish I could go into this?
Right. So one of the maps that we have hanging in the map gallery is a 1930 map. It's called A Pictorial History of
that one,
Schenectady.
yeah.
And it is sold in Barney's department store. And the artistic license that was used in that map is pretty extreme. So it's not just a map in terms of being able to find your way around the city. It is also a work of art, and there's a lot of little drawings. There's a father and son fishing on the Mohawk. There's a depiction of Charles Steinmetz, the Wizard of Schenectady, and it's labeled the Wizard of Schenectady is holding a magic wand. There's some jokes in it.
Yeah, like, did you remember your fishing license, son? This map is made with artistic license, Pop. I remember that one. I got that reference.
That's a good reference.
It's a deep cut.
My favorite joke on that map is, what street is this?
Watt Street. I remember that one.
Street.
Yeah, Watt Street.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm
WATT.
I'm a big fan of the "Who's on first?"
Yeah, I was gonna say
joke, and that's playing off of that joke.
And you get to live an entire Schenectady that is just built on those kinds of jokes.
Yes.
Well, no, I mean that I really do love that map though, because whereas it might not have as much information or reference points as a more traditional map like this Drips map over here, but I mean, just it gives you a sense for the flavor and the feel of the town.
A lot of optimism in that map.
Yes.
Yeah,
A lot of
optimism.
pride.
A lot of
of optimism.
And it's also interesting because in terms of historical accuracy, it's not actually that accurate. Like if you were to try to layer that map on top of some of our other historic maps or on top of a modern map, the perspective of it is actually really off. And it's hard to like put Union College where Union College actually is on the map.
scale is weird. It's like,
Right.
It's just kind of more, I think, for the vibes. This is kind of generally
Yes.
where the cities are.
Yes.
Well, that brings me to another couple of questions that I wanted to ask you, which is how accurate were the early maps, and what kind of techniques did the map makers rely on? And I'm talking about like the 17 and 1800s here.
Mm-hmm. So they're actually pretty accurate. Again, taking into account that things have changed over time, and there's just natural occurrences of changing, and there's man-made change. So again, the waterways that flowed through the city. If we were to go dig up all of those waterways that have been covered over by streets, would they still be in the exact same space that they were in back in the 17 and 1800s? And the answer is probably not, because water moves and therefore the shorelines move, and therefore the map will change over time that way. But overall, people were doing really good work in terms of cartography and surveying and ensuring that they were being as accurate as possible. A lot of times what we struggle with when we're looking, especially at like survey maps, like one of the maps that I brought here, for example, is that they were trying to convey a certain set of information on the survey, and the context of the survey is now missing.
Really? Wait, can you explain more about that? Like, you have a survey of some area. It looks like a city block, maybe? No.
So this is a, I can actually read, this is the 1862 Canal Survey showing the Maybes' expanded property holdings and where they are in relation to the Mohawk River. So the only parts of this map that we can actually pinpoint where they are where the Mohawk River is, and then where the primary house was in relation to, and the reason we can pinpoint those is because the house still exists. So that's the part of it, is this map was parcels of land that are probably continuous, but they were surveyed in pieces and then broken up onto this map in different
And you don't know why.
configurations.
You don't know why they decided to do that, or do you know who paid for this map?
We do have some of that information
Okay.
in the archives. And the map maker is Dorn, and the date 1862. So we know again some of the context of surveying and in relation to development in the Rotterdam area, but the other specifics of it, of like why did they break it up this way, why were they measuring these parcels of land, we don't have all of that information. It may be that they were trying to fit the map onto one sheet of paper, and that's why they broke it up the way they did. It may have been that they were doing the map over a series of months, and so they broke it up as they finished a piece, they drew it out and
Right.
then passed that on to the family or to whatever entity had ordered the map. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that maps were created, and for a lot of different purposes. That's the other thing, is to
Right.
think about why the map was being created. A lot of times it was created for a very narrow purpose. a lot of times it was a planning purpose. So they may have been surveying things to answer a specific question, like, could a railroad go through here? Or can we subdivide this plot into multiple things that we could then sell off to different entities? Can we build a plant, or can we build a business here? Those maps are all really interesting in what they include, but we don't always know why they include what they include or how they were developed in their particular circumstances.
And I
Can we
feel
see
like
that map?
that's a type of map that obviously still exists today. But like, if you're just the general public, when you think of a map, you're probably thinking of like a Google map, and
Right.
you're using it to get from point A to point B.
Right.
And you're saying most of these maps were probably not for that purpose at all.
Right.
Like, I'm looking at them and I don't know how many of these you would use to get somewhere.
Right. So this map, for example, is a really interesting one because it shows where GE employees were living in relation to Schenectady and the GE plant, but it also shows all the different symbols on the map show what time of day those employees were commuting into the GE plant.
Oh.
So it does show kind of the route of how they came from like Amsterdam or Duanesburg or Altamont, and how they were flowing into Schenectady.
So that must be after the advent of car travel.
Yes, this one's from 1942.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
And so it does show all those details of like how they got all the routes into Schenectady, but more importantly for planning purposes and for GE's purposes is what time were they moving on the roads and what time were they coming into the plant.
Because, of course, this is at a time where so much of the city's population relies on getting to GE. So much was moving towards that campus, and it had major, ramifications for the rest of the city. The city was kind of built around this flow of traffic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
That was cool.
Have any of these maps, again, the ones we talked about or other ones that are back in the collection, in your time at the Historical Society, have they really changed how you think about Schenectady or how you think about an aspect of history? Like something that's challenged preconceptions, perhaps?
So one of the things that we talk about in the library and in working with the collections is how frequently certain themes keep coming up and keep renewing themselves over the years. So one example of this is the bicycle culture here in Schenectady County. Like we've done a lot in the last few years, last decade, to build up bicycle paths, the Mohawk Bike Trail, all of those.
It's a huge initiative in the county, and I feel like in the state also.
Yes. It also dates back to the 1890s.
Wow.
So we have, in the Historical Society, we have a map, and I'll really quickly open this folder because it's a very fragile map. But the fragile map shows all of the bike paths of New York State. It's actually a road map with the bike paths marked in red that was created. It was meant to be like a pocket guide. It was sent out to members of the Road Map Society and the bicyclists enthusiast groups and sold to people who were doing road trips and bicycle trips. And it basically shows you how to get across New York State on a bicycle. And in the Schenectady area in particular, it shows quite a lot of areas that we now think of as like new bicycle paths.
Oh, wow.
Had some bicycle path, like to get from Schenectady to Albany. For many, many generations, people would say, no, there's no way that you could bike from Schenectady to Albany. But in 1893, you could, because there was a bike path marked on this map.
That's wild because I didn't realize that bike culture predated spandex. I thought that you had to have the first before the second. Like, I thought you just had spandex and people were looking for an excuse to wear it. And so they started riding
I've
bikes.
seen you out on the bike path riding your bike, and you were not wearing spandex.
No, I don't have spandex. I just
Well, not yet.
I wear shorts.
So before we start getting into History Forge, which is a whole separate thing, well, not really, because it's about maps, but it's very different from what we're talking about here. I want to ask, how do you guys in the library preserve these maps? Because as you just said, we got to be careful with this one. It's very fragile. What do you do?
So the number one thing is proper storage. So we first off put things in acid-free folders. We put them in a flat file or the box that is the correct size for the map. And we do everything we can to store the map flat and unfold it so that there's no pressure on any of the folded points or any of the rolled points. And there's when they're being used, because we do use them for research and for History Forge and for a lot of things for display, like in the museum. It is better that they are already flat and stored properly so that when we go to use them, we're not putting extra pressure or extra strain on the map by unfolding and refolding or rolling and unrolling. We also use things like archival plastic sleeves. So I have a whole presentation explaining what archival quality, preservation quality materials are that we use in the Historical Society and that we recommend people use for preserving their own archives. But there are specialty sleeves that we use for our really fragile and oldest maps that we do ensure that we're not even touching the map directly. We can still use it and still look at all the details, but the plastic is, the archival and preservation quality plastic is protecting the map directly.
You don't want those greasy fingerprints getting all over it.
Hey, they're not that greasy. I
talking about
washed my
myself,
hands.
actually.
Okay.
Washing your hands is very important. Clean, dry hands are the best way to handle paper materials, and especially maps like this where there might be inks and other treatments that have been done that we don't want to interact with any of the oils on our hands. So clean, dry hands, but also we don't want to use gloves when we're handling our maps because they are so fragile. Gloves have a tendency to catch on the fibers of the paper, or in some cases transfer dirt from the table that we're working on to the map, or to, if we're touching something else that has a little bit of dirt or debris on it and then touch a map, it's better not to be wearing gloves.
I don't know if you guys heard the siren, but that's the siren that blares if you improperly handle a map, right? They will come for you. They will.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I should have a siren at the library.
I don't know if that picked up, but if not, then you can edit this out.
Marietta's a very nice librarian. She is a contrast to the stereotypes. She's very helpful. But I would say, you don't want to be touching things with dirty fingers.
Yeah, so we'll leave it to Marietta then.
Yes.
Okay, so tell us about History Forge. What is History Forge? How does it relate to maps?
That sounds like something John. We'd have to ask John about that, right?
It is a great name. I love that it's like forge. It makes you think of
like
a blacksmith.
Right?
Yeah.
It's
It's a very evocative title.
Well, and we are creating something. So it's a digital mapping platform.
So wait, back up just a second. I want to say to everyone listening that History Forge is it's an online tool, and it's available on our website, schenectadyhistorical.org, and it is a work in progress.
Yes.
Okay, back to you.
Yes. So like I said, we are creating this. This is a new thing that we've started a few months ago. It's actually the platform that we're using was developed by the History Center at Tompkins County, and then they got a grant to expand it and make it more useful across New York State and across the United States. So they invited us to become one of their testing partners. So this is still very, very new in terms of the platform, but also very new in terms of a work that the Historical Society is doing to make our maps more accessible and more available to especially remote researchers, people who can't come to the library to use the materials. I love this program because it takes the historical maps and matches them up to a modern map. So like you were saying, the Google map, the modern map that people are used to seeing on their phones or on their computer, and being able to visualize Schenectady that way or Schenectady County that way, we're taking these maps from their paper format and putting them into the digital environment and then lining all of that up so that you can orient yourself according to the modern map and find yourself then on the historical map.
It's so cool. Is it kind of like a slider?
No, it's an actual. It's a like a
overlay.
cake layer.
Nice.
So we're making a map cake. You start with I'm going to show you this. I can show you this on the site as well. But when we go to the Forge, it starts with the modern map. And what you then do is turn on the historic map layers. So the 1850 Drips map, when I'm looking at it on its paper version, I have to figure out where I am on the map. But when you line it up with the modern map, and especially what you were saying, Mike, about where is north and where is the Mohawk River and where are all the landmarks that people use to figure out where they are in the city, it's automatically there because we, the Historical Society volunteers especially, have gone through and made sure everything lines up. So when you're looking at the modern map and then you layer that historic map on it, you get that orientation already there for you.
What an incredible tool. Any weird surprises from layering?
Again, so where people were incorrect about building their maps, the historical maps, a lot of people played fast and loose with the Mohawk River.
Oh my God.
So you think,
I love
you know,
that.
that's the big thing,
Yeah.
that everything should be oriented against the Mohawk River. But the overall shape of it, they've got the overall shape of it, but in terms of the actual positions, like where streets end at the river could be off quite a bit because they're lining it up against a certain bend of the river, but that they didn't actually take the measurements to figure out where that bend actually goes.
Oh.
So when we're stretching the maps and making sure that they're lined up correctly, sometimes the river doesn't match up with the actual river.
Or is it possible that just like the river has slightly changed course,
Yes.
like eroded away?
That
So-
is also true. That's
Yeah.
part of it. And part of what we're doing. What's interesting, though, is when we're taking maps that are somewhat modern. So, for example, some of the early 1900 maps, you'd think it hasn't changed that much since 1910, but it might have. We don't know for certain.
Yeah.
It's possible. But it also could be that they weren't being as careful with their measurements of the curvature of the river.
So for people who live in and around Schenectady, can they find their houses
Not
on
yet.
History Forge? Okay.
Not yet. That's coming, though. So that's one of the things that we're working on is, getting maps up that cover the whole county. So we do have, for example, we have the 1866 Beers map, which covers the whole county. But most of the maps that we have up so far are like the ones I brought here today, cover Schenectady City. And in part, we did that because we were trying to test out the software and make sure that we were fully understanding the platform, and the city maps are easier ways to do that because they have so many streets on them and because we have so many that are within a certain time period.
Right. But I often see you guys working in the library with census records in History Forge. So can you explain to me how the census records come into map digitization and overlays?
Right. So that's a really good point. And that's partly why this software, this platform is so powerful, because we can add the census data on top of the map.
Oh my gosh.
So when we're looking at things like trying to analyze demographic data of different neighborhoods, for example, that doesn't show up on the map, but the neighborhood does. And then the census data tells us who was living there. So when we add the census data as another layer to the map, we can do searches like how many people in the Stockade neighborhood were homeowners and how many people were renters.
Okay.
We can search for things like how many Irish-born cooks were living in Schenectady in 1910.
Yeah, the census records from that time period, like turn of the century, are really just an incredible wealth of information. You can find out so much about a person. I mean, the level of detail they go into, not only where they were born, but where their parents were born. Incredible.
Right. And so we found one example of this where there was a theater in just down the street from it was in what was then the theater district, which is on Erie Boulevard and within a block of what was then Proctor's. So it's the Mohawk Theater. It became the Hudson Theater. But in 1910, the Mohawk Theater was a vaudeville theater. And there were people listed as living there, which is unusual because it's a business, it's a
right.
theater. You don't think people are living there. And the reason it shows up on the census is because people were listed as living in this building. Everyone living in that building worked for the theater.
Wow.
So you had the waitresses, the bartenders, the actresses, the actors, the singers. Everyone's living in the theater and
Oh, man.
working there.
Can you imagine just all those theater people under one roof
Well,
all the time?
it's funny because that whole industry, vaudeville, I mean, the movies completely put it out of business. So you have to wonder what happened to all of them.
Right. Where did
And
they
it
go
was
after?
so quick too, right? Like within five years,
Yeah.
I think.
Video
people
killed
who-
the vaudeville star.
It really did. So we'll have to look back in census records and see who we can find 20 years later and what their profession was.
The other neat thing about the History Forge platform is that we can put photos in as well. So for the different buildings and different landmarks, especially that people use when they're orienting themselves on the map and comparing how Schenectady looked at that time, we can put photos in addition to the census record, in addition to the maps, we can put photos in. So I had one researcher who was in Virginia, and she was working with her great aunt who was sadly in hospice care and wasn't able to visit Schenectady, but really wanted to see where her people were from, see where her family had grown up, even though she had never been there herself. So using the maps that we had up on History Forge and using some of the photos that we have digitized and added to History Forge or that are in our online catalog, she was able to create a virtual tour of Schenectady for her elderly aunt.
That's incredible. It's incredible how many tools have developed just in like the 10 years I've been working here to make this so much more accessible to people all over. I mean, I was going to say the country, but really all over the world. Anyone who has an interest in the history of our little city.
Yeah.
So before we sign off, Mike, any last questions?
Well, I don't know. There's one map that we haven't really touched on, and would you consider this a map? It's more of like an aerial view, right?
Right. Yes. It's the 1875 bird's eye view of Schenectady. And it is a map in that it does have streets and geographic features and does help you orient. But that's also, it's also an artistic representation of Schenectady.
This is one of my favorites, even though my house isn't on here. Because the houses are not actually accurate. It's kind of like the artist was like, I'm just going to draw 10 houses on here.
So he didn't do a photorealistic drawing of every single house?
Believe it or not, in the 1870s, they didn't have drones.
Oh, no, too bad. And I do wonder, like, how did the artist visualize all of this? Like,
right.
I mean,
some of it was he found a really high, whatever the highest point of the city or the area that he was looking for, he went up to the highest point and looked over. We do have a lot of topographic maps in the collection that you'd be able to figure out what the highest points are for the various areas that you're looking at, but also he just made it up. And that's partly why, the goal of the map, of this particular map, wasn't necessarily to show where all of the houses were, but to show a population density or to show the type of structures. So some of the buildings are recognizably churches, some of those buildings are recognizably businesses, and to show again the dispersal of people. So some areas are highly dense, some areas are less dense, and to kind of again give a interpretation of Schenectady as its growth in the 1870s.
And the legend at the bottom is interesting because it only has 28 things, and it definitely shows the priorities for the map maker. Like after Union College, the number one thing he wanted to show people was where the hotels were. And who owned the hotels. And then after that is churches.
That'd be valuable information for a traveler, right? And I guess, so while most of these buildings are just kind of generic filler, I mean, the ones that are listed here, these 28 highlights, I assume are kind of more representational.
We'd have to take a closer look. And we would invite all of our listeners to come in and take a closer look. This map is also on display, on permanent display. So...
Yes, absolutely. And again, if you want to look at our map collection at the library, just call or email me. Look at our website, schenectadyhistorical.org. There's a whole library and research section there. And come visit the museum, 32 Washington Avenue.
Great. And hopefully Mike and I will be back either in this format or our YouTube format for more here in Schenectady's as the winter continues.
Yeah, now that it's getting kind of to the quieter part of our year, if you have any suggestions for places you'd like to see covered by our little series, feel free to let us know. You can email us, you can leave a comment. Feel free to let us know. We're always looking for new inspiration and new ideas because there really is just so much to explore,
Yeah, it's true. There is. All right.
Well,
thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. And thanks to Open Stage Media, who can edit out that pause. But thanks to Open Stage Media for bringing all this technology to bear, because, again, this is just so nice, and we're really glad to be here.
We did really good with no awkward pauses until the end.
Until just now.